Hello people, long time not see. Today I want to tell you interesting story about how I created my own asset for Unity. This story is filled by mathematics, shader and 2 months of my own life.
It all started when, sometime in December, I got tired of developing in the village and switched to one of my old projects, which I return to from time to time to add something new to it. This is one of my favorite projects. It doesn't have a specific name yet, but in a sense, it's a modern 3D clone of the old Crimson Land. It's a meaty and bloody top-down shooter. So one of the main features of this game is that bloody traces from killed enemies remain on the ground, over time forming a bloody pattern on the floor, delighting the player with the sight of the ground covered in the blood of enemies. In order to cover the entire ground with blood, decals are used, traces on object in the sense. There are two main approaches to creating them in computer games in general and in Unity in particular. The first is moving decals, the so-called projections. They exist in the Unity game engine and they are very cool because they can go around the surfaces and be visualized on curved surfaces. But they don't suit me because they are quite expensive in terms of performance. The second option is to bake decals into the texture of object. Unity can't do this out of the box, so a long time ago I accidentally found one useful asset that helped me to do it. It was called UV Mesh Painter and it was made by someone named iRobbie. Interestingly, I didn't find it on the official asset store where it had already been removed from sale, but somewhere in the wilds of the internet in the form of an archive. The asset looked nice, had good documentation and good performance. It suited me perfectly. Here is what it did. There were some nuances. For example, you couldn't turn off such option to prevent it to take into account the silhouettes of objects standing on the way of the paint. That's why the blood trails under the killed monsters had some gaps in the shape of their bodies, but it didn't really bother me. So I had a blast messing around with my project in the Unity editor, until I decided to compile the project to let a friend try it out. This is where the problem came out. It turned out that the project wouldn't compile.
I consider myself a more or less experienced programmer in Unity. Times when something wouldn't compile for me all the time are long gone. Nowadays this happens very rarely.
If it doesn't compile, it means there's some third-party crap in the project developed by someone's crooked hands. After struggling for almost a day and deleting all the third-party assets from my project one by one, I finally got to this asset that drafts my decals, and it turned out that the problem was in it. With it, my project as simply wouldn't compile, or it would compile but immediately crash when I launched it. I was in despair. After all, this was one of the main features of the game, without which the game wouldn't be so tasty. I decided that I would fight this scourge. First of all, I tried to find an error in the asset itself. Fortunately, it's not very large, just a few shaders and scripts. I thought that I would quickly find some careless line of code that causes a problem, but that was not the case. Two big problems immediately arose with the shader and scripts. The scripts were not in the form of scripts, but in the form of DLL. This is a kind of archived library with scripts inside, which you just can't get to. At the time, I was not very interested in back engineering, that is, I never decompiled any DLL, it was just not very interesting to me, and I didn't need it at all. So I tried to dig into the shaders. Shaders, for those who don't know, are small programs that run not on the CPU, but on the video card for each pixel on the screen and allow you to create all sorts of visual effects, beautiful water, ice, fire, intricate lighting of objects, etc. Everything was open here, free for reading, but the problem is that I'm not exactly a complete novice in the shader, but close to it. Yes, I played around with the simplest things a little, but nothing more. So I looked at these shaders and didn't understand anything. That is a failure on both fronts. I was extremely upset, to tell you the truth. In addition, I went to the forum and found a topic dedicated to that asset. It turned out that the author had long since abandoned its support, and it had been removed from the store because it no longer worked with new versions of Unity, and the author himself had disappeared and was not answering anyone's emails. People complained that their money had disappeared and they were left with a broken piece of code, which was also impossible to fix because the code was packaged in the DLL and was inaccessible. I felt that I was not alone with this problem, and that this world needed a hero who would solve the problems of all these poor people and his own at the same time. At first, I tried to find a replacement for that asset. I searched the entire store and the entire internet, all the dirty places where they post piracy assets, all the forums where the topic of decals was raised. The main candidate for a replacement was Paint in 3D, which cost 60 bucks. For me, it was too expensive. Other assets either didn't do what I needed or were buggy. Conversation on the forums pointed to other developments in this direction, but they too had to tinker, test, know something about shaders and refine. In short, I didn't find any easy and good solution. And by the way, the asset I was using was really good compared to all the others. It was exactly what I needed. But what could I do? At first, I decided that I wouldn't waste my time on it, but after a few days, I realized that I couldn't get it out of my head. It was like a splinter in my ass. I couldn't even sleep peacefully. You probably know this feeling. So I decided that I would brush up on my knowledge of shaders and fix that asset, no matter what it cost me.
Am I the stupidest programmer in the world? Nope.
I once again searched the internet and found two more versions of this same asset. They behaved a little differently. I even made a comparison table. In one version, it didn't work at all, but it could be decompiled. In another version, it worked in the editor, but it didn't compile. In short, I had three pieces of the puzzle, each of which was a little broken, and I tried to make one whole working piece out of them. I even learned how to decompile DLLs. I downloaded several decompilers, figured them out, and even achieved a certain result. In one version, the DLL was decompiled more or less normally, and I looked at the code a little. The work of the asset was provided by two components, a script and a shader. The script placed the camera in the desired position and performed some preparatory processes, and the shader directly copied the decal onto the texture using GPU. I had to cope with both aspects. I understood the scripts, but I couldn't understand the shader. The shader used shadow mapping and depth mapping technologies, but for me it was like magic. I saw mathematical matrices here, some transformations in space, trigonometry, and I was shocked that I didn't understand anything at all.
I didn't want to waste my time on it at all. I didn't have it in my plans. I knew that learning the shader would take a lot of time, most likely weeks. It was like some kind of side quest in my main career of game developer. But it was a good opportunity to overcome shaders after all, because they have been learning me by their mystery for a long time. I had prepared for a marathon, not a sprint.
I decided to start almost from scratch. Videos on YouTube were not suitable. There people talked more about some ready-made solutions, for example, how to make a snow shader or a light shader, but I needed the fundamentals. That's why I chose books. I can't afford to buy any one, and I don't know which one is the best, so I do my pirate business in the famous Bay and other shady places. I find a few books. I like this one. It sounds very promising. The Shader Bible for Unity. I start reading. I take notice. The beginning is very good. A lot of fundamental information about how shaders are made in Unity. I will tell you in a few words. There are several programming languages for shaders. The main two of them are HLSL from the Microsoft and GLSL. You don't really want to learn the languages. Well, imagine learning a new programming languages with all its nuances. Moreover, the Unity developers made some kind of hellish cocktail. They took these two shader languages, mixed them, added their own mini languages called Shader Lab on top of them, and all this you need to know to draw some pink dot on the screen. This book is about the shader languages and their features inside Unity. The author gives several good examples from scratch on how to create the simplest shader for 3D objects that are not illuminated. Then he gradually adds ambient lighting from the sky, from the sun, glare, and other.
But in the middle of the book, the author accidentally tried to describe things detailed. He started to using macros, the big pieces of code developed by Unity developers to easy making shaders. For other typical game developers, it would be more convenient, but for me, it was a disaster, because I didn't understand the essence of these macros. For me, the book seemed abruptly end right before most interesting page. For me, it took about a week to master the book, with noting, making examples and some additional googling.
Then I started reading this book. Not the whole thing because it's so big, just chapter 1, Mathematical Fundamentals. First, I reviewed vector algebra. I was surprised at how methodically and fundamentally the author explains the theory. He even added some exercises at the end of the chapter. I did all the exercises. Then I figured out matrices. I never understood what they were for. And it turned out the matrices are the super useful and interesting thing. You can write a lot of information in them, but you need to get your hand dirty with them on examples. In the third chapter, the author told how matrices are used to calculate 3D transformation in a game scene. In a nutshell, it turns out that during scene rendering there are several coordinate systems: local object space, general world space, camera space, and screen space. And if, for example, you have some object on the scene and you want the player to see it on the screen, then each point of this object must first be translated from local space to world space, then to camera space, and then to screen space. And all this is done by multiplying matrices. Also, matrices are used to transform objects, their movement, changing their scale and their rotation. For example, the bottom row or right column in the matrix is responsible for movement, and this diagonal row is for scale. To rotate object, you can also insert wonderful trigonometric functions there instead of this diagonal row. Yummy, yummy. In general, the book is dedicated to creating your own rendering engine. I was delighted with what I read. It was as if a whole world had opened up to me. I was so shocked by these discoveries that I was already thinking about starting to write my own game engine, a future competitor to Unity and Unreal Engine. But my guardian angel dissuaded me from that stupid idea. So, in addition to the basic mathematics needed for shaders, I read about depth map and shadow map, which I needed, and finally everything came together in my head. I figured out how to draw decals on a texture in Unity. I really understood everything. Just so you know, I got so engrossed in this book and covered myself with notes that they were on the table, on the window sill, and on the floor. I locked myself in my room for a week, and I didn't go out to my wife and daughter and didn't let them into my room so they wouldn't confuse me. I didn't talk to them. My little daughter, who used to come into my room every morning to wish me good morning, even stopped knocking on my door because it wouldn't open for her. And in response, she could only hear the clatter of a keyboard and the rustling of paper somewhere inside. By the way, it was quite painful.
After mastering the book, I decided that I don't want to repair someone else's pathetic asset, but I want to make my own asset and sell it on Asset Store. Rolling up my sleeves, I started to make my own charm from scratch.
I decided that the basic functionality will be the same and in the iRobby asset, but it is very important to make it possible to shoot down obstacles on the path of paint. Also, after much thought, I decided that I will not hide my scripts in the DLL, but will leave them freely available for asset buyers so that they can fully customize the asset to their needs. It took about a week to grade my asset. After reading the books and mastering the necessary information, I didn't have any special problems with writing the functionality. Everything went more or less easily, because I had the knowledge. The asset itself is small, approximately 500 lines of code in scripts and 200 lines in shaders. And in fact, the lines that directly do the necessary work of drawing decals are only 20 or 40. To write these 40 important lines of code, it took a month of reading books. A few more words about technical details. What is the difficulty of baking one texture on top of another? When creating a 3D object, the modeler is like a tailor who lays out pieces of fabric on the floor before sewing them into a whole dress. Modeler distributes the polygons of the object on a square area, then, in some graphic editor like Photoshop, he paints it as he wants, and this square picture is called texture. During rendering in a computer game, depending on the location of the camera, the game engine finds the corresponding colored pieces of the texture for each visible polygon of the object and renders it. To apply a decal to the object, that is, bake it to its texture, then we need to perform reverse calculations. For the part of the object that the driving camera is directed at, we need to find the corresponding areas of the texture, but we don't take them for rendering, but apply decal pieces on top of them. And these mathematical transformation with the searching for the corresponding areas are exactly what make your brain boil, because they are very not intuitive, like any reverse action in engineering, by the way. So what I have done? Wrote neat, clean code in scripts and shaders, readable for other programmers, with comments and explanations. Tested on several different versions of Unity in different graphic modes and for different platforms, to make sure it works everywhere. It turned out that there are big unsolved problems on WebGL, so it is almost impossible to use my asset in browser games. I honestly wrote about this in the documentation. I moved the work of my asset to the end of the frame, so that it would not interfere with the main rendering loop in Unity. I made sure that my asset did not cause slowdowns in the game and that the FPS did not drop with it. The asset turned out to be really fast. I even felt proud of my work. Wrote good documentation on 9 pages with drawings and detailed explanation of how my asset works, so that no one would have questions using it. Made 2 demo scenes that clearly show the work of my asset and its capabilities. I posted them on itch.io so that a potential buyer could click before buying. I made them for all possible platforms: Windows, Mac, Android, iOS. I designed the asset page in the store. For this I had to work on the cover. I messed around with the little image that is the face of my asset for a long time. My wife criticized my graphics more than once during the process, pointing out that it looked like shit. But in the end I was satisfied with the result. But the most gorgeous in my opinion was the video trailer. I placed a cute anime girl in front of the camera, made her dance seductively to the music, and at the same time I put decals on her. This girl eventually became the face of my asset. I chose a name for the asset so that it wasn't long and immediately made it clear the essence of its functionality. At the end of the name I added the word PRO. This is an interesting case. I noticed that in the asset store, large professional assets have the words Pro, Ultimate, Awesome in their names, as if hinting that this is a powerful tool for professional programmers.
What do you think? Is such a marketing ploy appropriate?
I set a suitable price for my asset. For the first time in my life I set $30, being proudly of the quality of my product. And finally I wrote about my project on LinkedIn, on itch.io, on some forums and other social platforms. I tried to show it a little so that it would be easier to find.
And then my wonderful asset in the store, sparkling with freshness. It looks quite good next to other products.
Then I impatiently awaited the explosion of sales. In my dreams I saw how people would rush to buy my super asset. I went to the seller's page 10 times a day to see how many millions of dollars I already had in my account. But unfortunately, in a few weeks I received only single purchase.
So, what do I actually have? I've spent about 2 months for this side quest. and I earned a dirty 27 bucks. It's a shame. Why do my direct competitor have thousands of sales and I have single one? Of course, someone else might buy my asset. With the current price of my asset and taking into account the average salary of Unity programmers in Ukraine, I need about 200 people to buy my asset to making this story profitable to me. Considering the sales of my previous assets, I have a lot of doubts. Well, enough winning. You won't see my tears. Because a great night when no one sees. But there are some positive aspects of this story. I understood a lot of things about shaders, studied matrices, remembered thrill of serious study and note-taking, read smart books, and generally had a good time. What is the moral of this story? None. I've just told you an interesting story from a life of game developer. I just wanted to share a piece of my life with you. Thank you for your attention. See you again. Hello from Ukraine, where you can die every day. I didn't want to west someone else pathetic asset. What do you think about this? I don't know. And generally had a good time. Let shaders burn in hell.